We're in the 13th chapter, and we're looking at verses 31 to 35. The lament over Jerusalem. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to him, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I am casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work. Yet today, tomorrow, and the next day I must be on my way, because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you were not willing. See, your house is left to you, and I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord.'" Here we have what sometimes puzzles people. These Pharisees, who we normally think of as being antagonistic and opposed to Jesus, have come and seem to have given him a warning for his own good. And sometimes people get very confused by that and wonder why. Well, there's several different potential reasons. We don't really know why they did it. We can never know that. But there's potential different reasons why. One would be that they sincerely were giving him a warning to get out of there, that Herod was out after him. Because not all of the Pharisees were out to get Jesus. Remember Nicodemus, for one example. So that's possible that they were on his side. Plus, as I've mentioned many times, I think James, the brother of Jesus, when he was killed and martyred by the high priest, it was the Pharisees that sent word to the incoming governor of the region about it, and it was that incoming governor that deposed that high priest. So the Pharisees were on James's side at that time when James was martyred, which is many years after Christ, about 30 years later. So not all of the Pharisees were opposed. But there's another possible explanation, and that would be that Herod perhaps put these guys up to it. Now, most of Jesus' ministry, as we know, is in Herod's territory. It's in and around Galilee. And that's Herod, the tetrarch. That was where he controlled. Now, Jesus is crucified and executed in Jerusalem, which is under Pilate's reign, Pontius Pilate. And so it's possible that Herod, after having dealt with the turmoil of having killed John the Baptist, he just doesn't want to do this again. I don't want to go down that route. So maybe this guy that's causing all this trouble, maybe I need to flush him out of here and get him down the road a little further to Jerusalem, and we'll let him be a pain for Pontius, for Pilate. And that's possible. It's very possible that that's what happened. But if it is, Jesus kind of says, well, I know what you're up to, doesn't he? When he says, well, hey, I already know you're trying to flush me out to go to Jerusalem. No, that's why I'm going anyway, because no prophet is killed anywhere but Jerusalem. So obviously I'm going to Jerusalem. So he perhaps is calling their bluff there. But he doesn't mince words in what he's sending the message to Herod, does he? He says to go tell that fox. And today we might take that as almost a compliment, might we? He's so crafty like a fox, you know. It's sly and perhaps sneaky, but sometimes we use it almost as a term of endearment. Wouldn't have been such in Jesus' time. The fox was looked at that time as being sly also. That part of the perception or the metaphor still existed at that time. But the fox was also considered the most destructive of the animals. And he was also considered a symbol of worthlessness and insignificance. So for Jesus to say, go tell that fox, was quite an insult. And certainly not one that Herod was going to like if they brought it back. In fact, if you were Pharisees, did you really want to carry that back and say to Herod, oh, by the way, he called you a fox? That would be like going back and telling the king that he called you a derogatory, profane name. You may be the bearer of the bad news, is the one that gets the axe. So you wouldn't want to be the bearer of the bad news going back to Herod. So that's a possibility here that Jesus has called them out. But what the message beyond that, it really is that God has a plan. I already have a plan. You can't flush me out. You can't make me alter the plan. Nothing that you can do as a human being, nothing that we can do as a human being is going to change what God wants for an outcome for this world. We can disobey God all we want, and we can rebel, but God's going to find another way. God will, even if we don't answer the call, God will call somebody else. It'll get done. What needs to get done, what God wants to get done, will get done. Doesn't matter what we as human beings do. Even Herod, with all his power, was without the ability to deal with it. That idea about Herod trying to flush him out perhaps explains later in Luke when Jesus is arrested. Remember, he first goes to the high priest, then he goes to Pilate, and then in Luke's gospel, Pilate sends him to Herod. Well, why would he? That's one of those things you go, why would he do that? Well, because Herod's not in charge of this area. Well, he sent him to Herod because most of Jesus' ministry had been done, most of the turmoil had been done in Herod's jurisdiction. And of course, what does Herod do? I don't want anything to do with him. You take him back. I don't want this on my neck. So I actually kind of am leaning now. I've always supported the idea that they were actually doing it out of the goodness of their heart. But in reading and thinking about this, I'm kind of leaning towards that Herod was trying to pass the buck, so to say, which is a very human emotion. So he's trying to get him out and put it on Pilate's neck. So the final thing, at the end of this, we have this wonderful analogy of the chicken and its chicks, and it's talking about the Jewish people in Jerusalem, and it's Jerusalem that they're really talking about, the people of Jerusalem. Now, one of the problems that some scholars have with this is the idea that in all but this synoptic gospel, Jesus is only in Jerusalem once. But the thing about Luke is, remember, when he's 12, he's been there every year up until that time. And why would we think that suddenly at 12 he quit coming every year? For all we know very little about Jesus until he suddenly shows up, and John baptizes him, right? For all we know, Jesus may have been in Jerusalem before preaching. And so maybe he is, we don't know. So perhaps this is an indication that perhaps he was there trying to warn them again and again. He knows this time, though, it's not going to end the same. He's going to be crucified, and he's going to be killed in a very public display of the power of not only the temple and the high priest, but Rome and Herod as an extension of Rome, wanting to get rid of anyone that would oppose. And of course, from that we know that he then is resurrected. We're coming up on Easter, while we're celebrating this season. And he overcomes this, showing us that no matter what we do as human beings, we cannot change God's plan. God will prevail no matter what we as our puny little humans can throw at him. So why would we think that we, when we resist God, are going to stop God? Why wouldn't we embrace God? Because we know that God always comes out ahead in the end. So let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so very much for the message of Jesus. We thank you for the message of this season leading up to Easter, the entire coming Holy Week that's coming in a few more weeks. Lord, we just ask that as we go through this time of preparation, that you work on our hearts, you work on our spirits, and you bring us closer and closer to you as we go day by day and week by week as we get closer to that holy day. Pray all of this in your love and your glory.